Oh, so get ready, because this story, it's a wild one. It starts with like a cross-country road trip and ends in a really awful way in this quiet little Florida town.
Yeah, peaceful place, you wouldn't expect this kind of thing.
But exactly. We're diving into the case of Eileen Seiden. She was trying to, get her life back on track.
Turn things around, yeah.
But she ended up in this relationship that was, well, complicated is an understatement. And ultimately, it proved fatal. And what makes this whole case even more strange is that it involves a throuple.
A three-way romantic relationship.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So we're going to be looking at police reports, court transcripts, even some interviews with people who knew Eileen and the two other people in this throuple.
Zach and Christina.
Right, Zach and Christina. And, the real challenge here is going to be trying to figure out what actually happened.
Separating fact from speculation, right, because there's a lot of different accounts out there.
Yeah, tons. Okay, so to give you a sense of where this all went down, picture this. It's a quiet highway in Franklin County, Florida. The kind of place you imagine is all sunshine and sweet tea.
Like the picture of Southern charm.
Exactly. But back in April 2018, that peacefulness was shattered when they found a young woman's body by the side of the road.
Brutally beaten. It was a shock to that whole community.
Totally. And, it's a reminder that even in those picture-perfect places, bad things can happen.
No place is immune to darkness, really.
So true. And the discovery of Eileen's body, it was just the tip of the iceberg. Investigators quickly realized they had, two main crime scenes.
The roadside where her body was found and this motel room.
A bloody motel room. I mean, we're talking blood-soaked bed, signs that somebody tried to clean up really fast, even attempts to hide evidence.
They used luminol, that stuff that makes blood glow in the dark.
Oh, wow.
And it lit up all over the place, showing where someone tried to scrub away the blood. There was a shower curtain rod covered in blood.
With fingerprints, too, right?
Paw prints, actually.
Ugh, this is intense. So to even start to understand how everything got to that point, we need to back up and take a look at the people involved, starting with Eileen.
Yeah, let's get a sense of who she was.
Okay, so Eileen Seiden grew up in Miami. And honestly, her early life, it was rough. She lost her mom to cancer when she was only 9.
Oh, gosh, so young.
And then when she was just 14, her dad, who she was really close with, died suddenly of a heart attack.
She was a successful businessman, too, right?
Yeah. I mean, you can't imagine what those losses did to her at that age.
It's just heartbreaking.
It is. But thankfully, she had her older sister, Francesca. She became Eileen's guardian. And you can hear the pain in Francesca's voice in the interviews, just talking about how Eileen coped with all of it.
It's like the grief is still so raw, even after all this time.
I know. But, even with all that, what really comes through is how resilient she was.
Determined to build a life for herself.
Exactly. She was working as a property manager, had her own place, really valued her independence.
After everything she'd been through, you can understand why.
Totally. And that's a key part of understanding what happens next. Years later, she reconnected with this guy named Zach Abel. They started dating, but it wasn't simple.
No, far from it.
Zach was already with someone else, a woman named Christina Ajo.
And this is where it gets really interesting and messy.
Yeah. This wasn't your typical love triangle, though. Instead of choosing between Zach and Christina, she ended up in, a three-way relationship with them, a throuple, like we were saying.
It's a term people might not be familiar with. It means all three people are romantically involved with each other.
It's way more complicated than just, a typical two-person relationship.
Definitely. And in this throuple, the dynamics between them were, they were crucial to what happened in the end.
Right. And from what we can tell, Christina, she was older than Zach, and she came across as pretty controlling, manipulative.
There are even mentions of her using her father's job to kind of hold it over them. He was a high-ranking guy in law enforcement.
Wow. So what do you think about that whole power dynamic? How did that play into everything that happened?
It's got to create a really unbalanced situation, don't you think? Especially for Eileen, the one who was kind of new to it all.
Totally. That kind of power imbalance, it's a recipe for tension, even violence sometimes.
And sadly, that's kind of what happened here. We see evidence of physical abuse, Eileen not wanting to report it.
Yeah, that reluctance to speak up.
And even a trip to the ER, which really makes you think.
It's a classic pattern of abuse, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But it gets even more complicated because the stories differ on who was really the aggressor.
Some say Zach was the main abuser, others point to Christina, and some even say the violence went both ways.
So everyone was playing a part.
It's rarely that black and white, right? It can be such a tangled mess of actions and reactions, all that power and manipulation.
It's a mess for sure. And unfortunately, Eileen got caught right in the middle of it. So this is kind of where things come to a head. It seems like Eileen had had enough.
She was done.
Yeah. The sources show this big fight that happened, and that was what triggered their road trip. Eileen wanted out of the whole throuple situation.
But Zach and Christina, for whatever reason, they weren't ready to let her go.
It's almost like she was trapped.
Emotionally, for sure. And financially, too, right? Remember, she worked for their used car dealership. That independence she fought so hard for, it was slipping away.
It's sad. Like, she went from one kind of dependence to another.
Exactly.
And to make matters worse, as they headed out on this road trip, Christina was sending them these, like, really threatening texts.
Yeah, like she was losing it.
There's one that's really scary. It says, "You effed me over, and now I'm effing you over." I mean, that's chilling when you think about what happened.
It makes you wonder, was it a real threat or was she just, like, blowing off steam?
Right. What does it tell us about her personality?
Like, how dangerous was she really?
Yeah. And did Eileen see those texts as real threats? Or did she think Christina was all talk?
Yeah.
Because, despite all that tension, they kept driving. Ended up in Franklin County, Florida. It's like fate led them there, or maybe just a wrong turn.
To that motel.
That fateful motel room.
And this is where it gets even more important, what Eileen was telling people. She was reaching out to her best friend, Allie, and her sister, Francesca.
Yeah.
She was scared, desperate. And one message to her sister, she even said, "I think they're going to kill me."
It's so hard to read that, knowing what happened. But on the surface, the trip itself, it sounded wild. There was partying, like they were actually having fun sometimes. It's so strange to think about that, alongside this, like, building tragedy.
It's that hidden side of abuse. What looks like a good time to one person is actually a nightmare for someone else.
So true. And their activities in Franklin County are even more jarring. Like, they were sightseeing, eating out, playing mini golf, just normal stuff.
But with this dark cloud hanging over everything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Then we get to the night of the murder. And we have Christina's version of events, and it's awful. It was this innocent question Eileen asked about maybe meeting up with some people they'd met.
Sounded harmless enough, right?
Totally. But it just set Zach off. He flew into a rage and attacked Eileen. Christina says she tried to stop him, but the attack was just so brutal.
He didn't let up?
No. And Christina even admitted to being part of the beating, though she put most of the blame on Zach, saying he was in this, like, blind rage.
So she admits to being involved, but minimizes her role.
Right. And her testimony talks about Zach using a shower curtain rod, a wooden walking stick. The injuries Eileen had were horrific.
It's hard to even imagine, and this is where we go back to that forensic evidence we talked about. The
Yeah.
blood, the shower curtain rod, it seems to match up with parts of Christina's story. But then we get to the trial, and that's when things get really murky.
Yeah, like, whose story are you supposed to believe?
Exactly. Zach's lawyer, he argued, Christina was the one who did it, the jealous one who wanted Eileen gone.
So basically, he was saying Christina planned the whole thing.
Yep. They used those threatening texts, and the fact that she was driving the car after it happened. They said Zach was scared of her, that he just followed her lead, wasn't really a killer.
Interesting.
They even brought up Christina's dad and his law enforcement connections, like she used that to intimidate Zach.
That's a pretty smart strategy, taking the focus off Zach and making people question if he really meant to do it.
Create that doubt, yeah.
But the prosecution, they were saying Zach and Christina were in it together. They shared responsibility for Eileen's death and then for trying to hide it.
Covering their tracks.
And they emphasized that Zach and Christina cleaned the motel room together, got rid of Eileen's body, then took off, like they were running away from what they did.
Trying to evade justice.
So the jury, they had to decide who to believe. Two totally different versions of what happened. Must have been a tough call.
It wasn't clear-cut. And this is where motive is so important. Did Zach actually have a reason to kill Eileen? Was it just like a burst of anger because of that question she asked?
Or was it Christina, like the defense said, because she was jealous and wanted Eileen out of the picture?
Good question. Or maybe there's another explanation. Could they both have been involved, but in different ways?
Yeah, like maybe they each had their own reasons, their own level of, blame.
That's possible. And that's what the jury seemed to think. They didn't fully believe either side. They found Zach guilty, but not of first-degree murder like the prosecution wanted. It was second-degree murder, same as Christina.
So they met in the middle, kinda. Like, they both did it, but maybe not to the same degree.
It's a complicated verdict, And it reflects the whole case. There wasn't one piece of evidence that made it totally clear who was responsible.
It's also interesting that Zach didn't say anything at his trial, didn't testify.
Yeah, what do you make of that?
Do you think it hurt him or helped him? Hard to say.
Adds to the mystery for sure. The defense claimed that Christina had been threatening and manipulating him for years, said he was too afraid to stand up to her.
But the prosecution said him staying silent just proved he was guilty, like he couldn't face what he'd done.
Classic legal dilemma. Does staying quiet protect you, or does it make you look worse?
Right. And here, the jury, they weren't convinced by Zach's silence.
And then there's Mike Picavet, the friend Zach confided in. He's the one who ended up leading the police to them.
Wow, that's heavy.
Yeah, it's like torn between loyalty and the horror of what he knew.
It's got to be a tough spot to be in. And even after the trial, Mike still seems really conflicted, like he feels guilty. He says Zach is innocent, that Christina used him, but the jury didn't see it that way.
It shows how justice isn't always neat and tidy. There are still a lot of questions in this case, things we may never know for sure.
So many unanswered questions. And I think one of the biggest is, what was Eileen about to say right before Zach attacked her?
Yeah, it's like a cliffhanger we'll never get the end to.
Right. Christina testified that Eileen started to say something like, "Christina, guess what?" but never finished the sentence.
Haunting, right.
Totally. Like, what was she going to reveal?
Some people have said maybe she was pregnant, but the autopsy didn't show that. Maybe she thought she was, or maybe it was some other secret, something Christina wouldn't want to get out. But we'll probably never know.
It's frustrating. And then there's the whole thing about the jury, why they went with second-degree murder for Zach.
Yeah, what do you think? Did they believe Christina's story, but not completely?
Or maybe they thought Zach was manipulated, like the defense said.
It's hard to know what was going on in their heads. But the verdict seems to say they thought about all those questions, It's not an easy case. There's a lot of gray area.
Definitely. It shows how complicated these cases can be with all the different stories and evidence.
It's a reminder that sometimes, even with a trial and a verdict, we don't really get all the answers.
In the end, they both got pretty serious sentences.
Yeah, Zach got life in prison.
And Christina got 25 years.
It's a reminder of how bad things can get, how domestic violence can lead to such a terrible outcome.
It's so sad. It makes you think about all the what ifs.
Yeah.
Like what if Eileen had just gotten out of that relationship?
What if somebody had stepped in, done something?
Right. What if she'd been able to get on that bus to Miami like she wanted?
It's tough to think about, and it shows how complex domestic violence is. Sometimes it's hard to understand why someone wouldn't just leave.
Yeah, but like you said, it's not that simple. There's fear, being controlled, maybe depending on the abuser for money. Sometimes people think things will get better.
Absolutely. And for Eileen, you had this extra layer with the throuple thing. It's like she was even more isolated, trapped. It shows that abuse doesn't have to be physical. Emotional abuse, controlling someone's mind, that can be just as bad.
It often comes along with the physical abuse too.
Yeah, for sure.
So, thinking about Eileen's story, what can we learn from this? What should we be watching for, not just in our own lives, but with the people we know? Because there are so many stories like this out there.
Yeah, it happens more than we want to think about.
It does. So what are the signs?
Well, awareness is key. You got to recognize the red flags. Like if someone's suddenly cut off from their friends and family, or their behavior changes, or they have injuries they can't explain, or if they seem scared of their partner, those are all signs that something might be wrong.
It's not enough to just notice the signs, though, right? We have to know what to do. Like, how can we help people in these situations? How can we support them and make sure they know they're not alone?
There are some great organizations out there doing good work, like the National Domestic Violence Hotline. They're available 24/7, offering support to victims and the people who care about them. There are shelters, support groups, legal help. It's about creating a safety net so people don't fall through the cracks.
It's so sad to think that Eileen reached out, told her best friend and her sister she was scared. And it still wasn't enough.
It shows that we have to do better, We have to listen to people when they ask for help, and most importantly, believe them. Too often, victims of abuse are silenced. People don't listen, or they say it's not that bad. We have to change that.
We do. So wrapping up this deep dive into Eileen's story, I think it's important to end with some hope, something we can all do. We can't change what happened to her, but we can try to make things better for others.
Yeah, I agree. We need to start by talking about it, educating ourselves, being honest about how common domestic violence is. We need to get rid of the shame, call out the myths, and empower people to get help.
And hold abusers accountable. I mean, yeah, there was a trial, there were sentences, but Eileen is still gone. It doesn't take away the pain she went through.
But we can make her story matter by sharing it, by raising awareness, by helping people who are struggling. That's how we honor her memory and work towards a world where this doesn't happen so much.
So if there's one thing to take away from all of this, it's this. If you see something, say something. If you think someone's being abused, step up, offer support. Let them know they're not alone. You might be saving their life.
That's right. And if you're the one being abused, please remember you are not alone. There is help out there. You deserve to be loved and respected, and you deserve to live a life without violence and fear. Reach out, get help, and know that things can get better.